The simulation city that I will be doing is on Chicago. So what I will be doing is, God damn it, but yeah, I'll start over on that. Shit, I'm winging it right now. That's why.
It's fine.
So.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to my Sim City. My Sim City will be modeled after Chicago. Hence the name Chicago 2.0. So what I wanted to do with this city was, I wanted to create a city that produced low CO2 emissions, ran on renewable energy, and had reduced soil erosion in the agricultural field. So the methods that I wanted to use for this city, I decided to go with nuclear power plants, wind turbines, and solar energy. For nuclear energy, why I chose this was because nuclear energy runs 24/7. It's a constant source of energy, according to the pros and cons of nuclear energy. And its CO2 output is only 5.7 grams of carbon equivalent emissions per kilowatt hour. And that is the lowest, that is the lowest emission output by any energy source. Additionally, it is also 27% less expensive than the leading source of energy, which is coal, according is electricity produced by nuclear energy cheap. A couple of the cons with nuclear energy is that nuclear energy has the potential to be very destructive, as seen with a few nuclear accidents in recent history, specifically the Fukushima power plant. And another con is that while it doesn't produce CO2 emissions, it does produce 20 to 30 tons of radioactive waste annually. So, specifically for Chicago, why I wanted nuclear energy was that in Chicago there are a lot of cars, and that is one of the leading sources of CO2 emissions. And other sources of CO2 emissions being coal plants and some other sources. So why I chose nuclear energy due to the fact that it produces very little CO2 or CO2 equivalent emissions. So it pretty much keep a nice, clean air, good air quality. And to address the issue with nuclear waste could be easily transported out of the city and out of the general area to a much more stable area or a much more remote area where nobody will be affected by it. So for solar energy, why I chose this was because it is able to provide energy for up to 350,000 homes, and that is a lot, specifically for a city big as Chicago with over 2.7 million people population. One of the cons of solar energy is that it's most effective when the sun is out. For Chicago, as the city has over 2.7 million people, and installing solar power plants that produce electricity for up to 350,000 homes, that is very good. And to address the issue with the sun not being out enough, of what you could do is you can place these solar power plants out in areas of Chicago or outside of Chicago that receive more sun, and what you could do is you could route that electricity back into the city. As for wind, I chose wind because it produces very little amount of carbon equivalent compared to other fossil fuel counterparts. That's according to assessing emissions from power sources. And again, it is a renewable form of energy using wind, which is infinite. One of the ends of wind energy is just like solar energy. You need wind for it to work. So why I wanted to use wind energy specifically? Well, Chicago is specifically known as the Windy City, so I wanted to take full advantage of the wind that is present in the city, and I could use that for energy. But like I said, actually one of the things that you need to account for is that wind is inconsistent. So to address this wind inconsistency, what we could do is we could build these wind turbines to be really tall and reach area as up high in the sky that receive a lot more wind and are very consistent, so we could keep generating more electricity. As for agriculture, I decided to go with windbreaks. So why I decided to use windbreaks is because it protects from wind, and which blows soil away from a much needed crops, according to the soil management and issues document. And another reason why is it allows for more enhanced crop production. One of the cons for windbreaks is it's pretty expensive to plant trees, and it takes a while for these trees to grow, so you won't see results immediately. So, like I said, Chicago is known as the Windy City, and I did not want that wind to interfere with agriculture. So that is why I decided to use windbreaks, so crops could grow more easily and in more abundance. So, like I said, Chicago, known as the Windy City. And the main issue with windbreaks, like I said, is that planting trees, it takes a very long time. So what I decided to do was, what would be the best option was to deforest areas outside of Chicago, and only leave a perimeter of trees, so it looks like a square or a line of trees. So trees will still be there, and we're good. So, taking into account all of the values and all of the methods that I want and to apply to the city, I created a computer simulation model that would model the amount of carbon emissions, the amount of is how efficient the city is, and according to and if you look here at the graph on the right, you can see that this line here represents the emission output from the city, and the line above it is the emission output by not other cities, from around the world. So, as you can see, by applying these methods to a city, we could decrease the amount of carbon emissions or carbon equivalent emissions. And so, what I decided to put my focus to make this happen was, I thought, okay, Chicago is I would say it's a very rich city, so I spent less of my time towards cost savings and less of my time towards land preservation, as there is plenty of flat land outside of Chicago, plenty of useful land outside of Chicago. And what I put my value to was oil independence, or outside energy sources, and so we could be very independent. And I put it towards air quality as well. And to meet those demands, I put more emphasis on building efficiency, nuclear energy, carbon capture, renewable energy, transportation efficiency, and land use.